Today, we're diving into one of the most alarming developments in the Baltic region, a situation that has shaken the power balance of Northern Europe and struck directly at the heart of Vladimir Putin's deepest fears. The Baltic Sea, once a strategic playground for Russia's naval ambitions, has now become a nightmare scenario for Moscow. What has unfolded in recent weeks has not only changed regional security dynamics, but has also made Russia's long-term strategy in the region far more complicated. The Baltic Sea has officially become NATO's lake, and for the Kremlin, this is nothing short of a strategic disaster. For decades, Russia has relied on its access to the Baltic Sea as a critical lifeline for trade, for military projection, and for geopolitical leverage. St. Petersburg, Kaliningrad, and the surrounding areas have always been viewed as vital points for Russian influence. But today, the tide has turned. NATO's control over nearly every coastline surrounding the Baltic means Russia's naval movements can be watched, restricted, and even intercepted. This transformation is not theoretical anymore, it's happening in real time, and it's reshaping the future of Europe's security landscape. The turning point came when Sweden finally joined NATO, closing the last major gap in the alliance's northern defense chain. With Finland already a member and Denmark, Norway, and the Baltic states firmly within NATO's structure, Russia now faces a reality it has long dreaded: total encirclement in the north. Every major sea route, every key strait, and every strategic chokepoint is now under NATO surveillance and control. For Putin, this isn't just a political setback, it's a strategic humiliation. Imagine this from Moscow's perspective. In the past, Russia could maneuver its Baltic fleet with relative freedom. It could use Kaliningrad as a forward base to project power, threaten Europe, and conduct exercises meant to intimidate its neighbors. But now, those same maneuvers are being monitored from every direction from the skies of Finland and Sweden, the waters controlled by Denmark, and the NATO radar systems positioned along the Baltic coast. The message is clear: Russia's dominance in the Baltic is over. What makes this even more alarming for Moscow is that this shift didn't come from open conflict, but from a gradual political realignment that Russia failed to prevent. NATO's expansion into Scandinavia and the Baltics represents one of the biggest strategic defeats for Putin since the beginning of his presidency. The very nations that Russia once dismissed as minor players have now become critical links in a defensive chain that isolates Moscow's influence. Denmark, in particular, has become a central player in this unfolding drama. With control over the Danish Straits, the narrow waterways connecting the Baltic Sea to the North Sea, Denmark essentially holds the gate to Russia's only access point to global waters. This means that any Russian naval movement must pass through territory that is now effectively under NATO watch. This is the kind of strategic chokehold that Russia has long feared but could never fully prevent. Meanwhile, Finland's entry into NATO extended the alliance's direct border with Russia by over 300 kilometers. This not only adds pressure on Russia's northwestern frontier, but also provides NATO with new logistical and intelligence capabilities to monitor Russian activity near St. Petersburg and the Kola Peninsula, home to Russia's northern fleet and major military installations. For Putin, this means his forces can no longer move freely without being tracked. Sweden's military integration further compounds the problem. With its advanced air force, naval assets, and high-tech surveillance systems, Sweden gives NATO a strategic advantage across the central Baltic. The island of Gotland, located at the heart of the sea, is now seen as a crucial NATO stronghold capable of monitoring and, if necessary, controlling all naval traffic between the Baltic states and Scandinavia. For decades, Russia hoped Gotland would remain neutral territory, but that dream is now gone. From the Russian military's perspective, the transformation of the Baltic Sea represents a nightmare scenario. Kaliningrad, once a symbol of Russian strength in Europe, is now increasingly isolated. The enclave is surrounded by NATO members Lithuania and Poland, and its supply routes are vulnerable. What was once a valuable forward base now risks becoming a military liability. In the event of a conflict, NATO could easily block access to Kaliningrad, effectively cutting off Russia's westernmost territory from the mainland. Inside Russia, this development has triggered serious discussions among military analysts and strategists. Many admit, though quietly, that Russia's position in the Baltic is now one of weakness. The once feared Baltic Fleet, though still equipped with submarines and missile ships, operates under constant surveillance. NATO aircraft patrol the skies, and Western navies conduct joint exercises at an unprecedented scale. Every move Russia makes is countered with precision, but this isn't just about military positioning, it's also about economic and political consequences. The Baltic Sea is a major trade artery for Russia, particularly for energy exports. The Nord Stream pipelines, once symbols of Moscow's economic power in Europe, are now either destroyed, inactive, or under scrutiny. With Western nations diversifying energy supplies and tightening sanctions, Russia's economic leverage in the region has evaporated. The fear in Moscow isn't just about losing control over the Baltic, it's about losing relevance. For decades, Russia's strategy relied on dividing Europe, exploiting neutral zones, and maintaining spheres of influence. But with the Baltic nations united under NATO and Scandinavia now fully aligned with the West, Russia's ability to manipulate the region politically has collapsed. The Baltic Sea, once a zone of contest and uncertainty, is now a fortress for Western unity. What's even more frustrating for Putin is how quickly this transformation happened. Just a few years ago, the idea of Finland and Sweden joining NATO seemed unlikely. Both countries maintained a careful balance, cooperating with the West while avoiding direct confrontation with Russia. But after the invasion of Ukraine, that balance shattered. Putin's aggressive policies pushed his neighbors directly into the arms of NATO. What was meant to expand Russian influence instead achieved the opposite. This is why the current situation feels like a nightmare from Moscow's perspective. The Baltic Sea region has gone from being a gray zone to a NATO stronghold almost overnight. And now, Russia is forced to defend its shrinking position with fewer allies, weaker logistics, and mounting international isolation. Even Belarus, one of Russia's closest partners, offers little help in the Baltic context. Behind the scenes, Western intelligence agencies are strengthening their networks across the region. Satellite surveillance, underwater sensors, and joint exercises have created an information net so tight that Russia can barely move a vessel without being detected. The Russian Navy, once proud of its stealth and precision, now finds itself cornered in its own backyard. In response, the Kremlin has begun increasing its rhetoric warning of potential military escalation and deploying missile systems in Kaliningrad. But these moves only reinforce the perception of desperation. Every time Russia threatens escalation, NATO responds with even greater unity and coordination. The more Moscow pushes, the more isolated it becomes. The psychological impact of this isolation cannot be overstated. Putin built his reputation on the image of strength and control on restoring Russia's influence after the fall of the Soviet Union. But now, that image is cracking. The Baltic Sea, a region once considered safe and strategically vital, has slipped from Russia's grasp. The symbolism of this loss is profound. It represents not just a geographical setback, but a collapse of one of Putin's core geopolitical visions. Meanwhile, NATO is not standing still. Joint exercises, new naval deployments, and enhanced radar systems are reinforcing the alliance's dominance. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany have increased their presence, while Denmark, Finland, and Sweden coordinate patrols to ensure full surveillance coverage. Even small nations like Estonia and Latvia are investing heavily in defense modernization, knowing that their security now directly ties into the stability of the region. This collective momentum has turned the Baltic Sea into a test case for modern deterrence. It's where NATO demonstrates that unity works, that technology and cooperation can overcome aggression, and that's exactly what terrifies the Kremlin. Russia knows it cannot easily compete with NATO's combined naval and aerial power, especially given its stretched military resources due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Internally, Russian officials are beginning to acknowledge that the Baltic front may no longer be salvageable. Instead, the focus may shift toward defending the Arctic and the Black Sea areas where Russia still holds some strategic advantages. But even there, NATO's presence is growing, and Russia's ability to respond is constrained by sanctions, economic troubles, and international isolation. The Baltic transformation also sends a message to other parts of the world. It shows how alliances can reshape geopolitics without a single shot being fired. Through unity, intelligence sharing, and strategic positioning, NATO has managed to achieve what once seemed impossible, containing Russia within its own regional boundaries. The days of unchecked Russian influence in Northern Europe are gone. In the coming months, we can expect more military exercises, intelligence cooperation, and defensive infrastructure projects across the Baltic region. Ports will be upgraded, surveillance networks will expand, and cyber defenses will strengthen. The West is preparing not just for deterrence, but for long-term dominance of this critical region. For Russia, the nightmare continues. Every new NATO base, every radar installation, and every patrol symbolizes another nail in the coffin of its old strategic ambitions. The Baltic Sea, once a route of power and pride, is now a reminder of how quickly geopolitical tides can turn. Putin's biggest fear, encirclement and containment by NATO, is no longer a prediction. It's reality, and it's unfolding right now in the cold waters of the Baltic. The consequences of this shift will shape European security for decades to come. For the Kremlin, it's not just a setback. It's a revelation that its once feared power is now being systematically boxed in. As the waves crash against the Baltic shores, one truth becomes clear: the age of Russian dominance in the region is over. The nightmare that Putin long sought to prevent has finally arrived, and there's no waking up from it.